This young man once had a close relationship with Baltasar Ngonga's wife, and they even slept together, to the point where they recorded a video of their encounter. The wife of Baltasar did this with the intention of seeking revenge and hurting her husband, who had been seen in the video cheating on her. Listen to how this young man describes it.
My name is Daniel, 28 years old, and I never imagined I'd find myself in a situation like this. It all started when I met Mrs. Baltasar at an upscale bar in the city. She was elegant, well-spoken, and undeniably beautiful. But behind her confident smile, I sensed something dark, a fire of resentment burning within her. We started talking, and she was surprisingly direct. I know this might sound crazy, but I want to destroy my husband the way he destroyed me. She told me about her husband, Baltasar Nganga, a powerful man, a wealthy, influential, but a serial cheater. Not just once, not twice, but with over 200 women. She had endured years of humiliation, swallowing her pride while he paraded his affairs without shame. But now, she wanted revenge. I want you to sleep with me, she said, locking eyes with me. And I want a video of it. At first, I thought it was a joke. This was insane. Why me? But as she spoke, I understood. She didn't just want to cheat back, she wanted evidence, a proof that would destroy Baltasar the way he had shattered her. I hesitated. I wasn't the type to get involved in married people's drama. But the way she looked at me, the raw pain in her voice, something in me caved. Maybe it was the thrill of it. Maybe I just wanted to be part of a story that would shake the very foundations of her husband's arrogant world. We met in a luxurious hotel suite high above the city, with dim lighting and expensive champagne waiting on the table. As I pressed record from the camera, she whispered, "Tonight, I take back my power." The next morning, she thanked me and took the video. Now, let's see how he likes it when the world knows he's been played. I don't know what happened next, whether she sent it to him, leaked it online, or used it as blackmail. But one thing was clear, Baltasar Nganga had finally met his match. And I had just played a role in one of the greatest acts of revenge I had ever seen. Days passed, and I couldn't get Mrs. Baltasar out of my mind. I kept wondering, what did she do with the video? How did Baltasar react? I had no way of knowing until, one evening, my phone rang. It was her. "Meet me at the same hotel," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." When I arrived, she was sitting by the window, a glass of whiskey in her hand. Her usual poised elegance was still there, but something was different. There was a storm brewing in her eyes. "I sent him the video," she said, exhaling slowly. "And now, everything is falling apart." She told me what had happened. The moment Baltasar saw the footage, he lost his mind. He was a man who had spent years cheating without consequences, believing himself untouchable. But now, his own wife had outplayed him. He called me, screaming, threatening, she continued. Then he begged. He said I humiliated him, that I ruined his reputation. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. "So, he can sleep with hundreds of women, but one time you do it, it's a betrayal." She smirked. "Exactly. But the situation was more serious than I thought. Baltasar was powerful, connected. A man like him didn't just accept defeat. He's not letting this go, Daniel," she admitted. "He's looking for you." My heart pounded. "For me? Why?" "Because he knows it was you." I cursed under my breath. Maybe this wasn't just about revenge anymore. Maybe this was war. That night, I stayed in the hotel, unsure of my next move. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You made the biggest mistake of your life. You're a dead man." I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. Baltasar wasn't just mad, he wanted payback. I had to think fast. I called Mrs. Baltasar. "We need to meet. Now." She agreed, and we met in a private villa outside the city. She was nervous too. "Daniel, you need to disappear for a while." "Disappear? What about you?" She shook her head. "He won't hurt me. He still loves me, in his twisted way. But you? He wants revenge. I realized then that I had underestimated this entire situation. What started as a wild act of passion had turned into something deadly. I knew I had two choices, a fight or run. I wasn't going to wait for Baltasar to find me. I packed my things and booked a flight out of the country. Before I left, I saw Mrs. Baltasar one last time. "Are you sure you're going to be okay?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Don't worry about me. He can't break me anymore." And with that, I walked away. As I boarded the plane, my phone buzzed one last time. Another message from Baltasar. "Run as far as you want. I will find you." The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The plane landed in Madrid, but my mind was still back home, stuck in the chaos I had left behind. I tried to convince myself that leaving was the right choice, that Baltasar and Ganga's threats were just angry words. But deep down, I knew better. A man like Baltasar wasn't the type to forgive. He was rich, connected, and ruthless. If he wanted me found, he would find me. I checked into a small hotel in the city center, keeping my head down. For the first few days, I barely left my room, paranoid that at any moment someone would come knocking. But nothing happened. No messages. No threats. No sign of Baltasar. Maybe I had overreacted. Then, on the fifth day, I noticed something. A black SUV parked across the street. It had been there for hours. I tried to brush it off, maybe I was being paranoid. But later that night, as I stepped out for air, I saw the same SUV again, parked just a block away. I wasn't paranoid. I was being followed. My heart pounded as I walked back to the hotel. The lobby felt too open, too exposed. I took the elevator up to my floor, checking over my shoulder. The hallway was empty. But as I reached my door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The lock was scratched. Someone had tried to break in. I swallowed hard and pushed the door open cautiously. My room was just as I had left it, or so it seemed. But then, I noticed my suitcase had been moved. My laptop bag was slightly open. Someone had been here. I grabbed my bag, my passport, and whatever cash I had left. I had to leave. Now. As I stepped back into the hallway, my phone buzzed. A new message. "Running won't save you, Daniel. We will find you." I didn't hesitate. I took the stairs down instead of the elevator, slipping out through a side exit. The moment I stepped into the street, I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't look back. I just ran. I had nowhere to go. No friends in Madrid. No safe place to hide. My only option was the one person who had gotten me into this mess in the first place. I found a payphone and dialed Mrs. Baltasar's number with shaking hands. She answered on the first ring. "Daniel. They found me," I panted. "I don't know how, but they found me." There was silence on the other end. Then she whispered, "Listen to me. Go to the Plaza Mayor. There's a cafe called La Sombra. Sit in the back. Someone will meet you." "Who?" "Someone who can help." I wanted to ask more, but she hung up. I had no choice. I had to trust her. I made my way to the cafe, keeping my head low. The place was small, dimly lit, and half empty. I took a seat in the back, my pulse still racing. A few minutes later, a man slid into the seat across from me. He was in his 40s, dressed in a dark suit with sharp eyes that looked like they had seen too much. "You must be Daniel," he said, stirring his coffee. I hesitated. "Who are you?" He smirked. "A friend of Mrs. Baltasar. You can call me Javier." I studied him carefully. "Are you here to help me?" He took a slow sip of his coffee. "That depends. How far are you willing to go to stop Baltasar?" Next day, the news was everywhere. Every major channel, every online outlet, Baltasar Nganga arrested in Equatorial Guinea. I sat frozen in front of the TV, watching as grainy footage showed him being dragged out of his mansion by government agents. His usually smug face was pale, his hands cuffed behind his back. Reporters shouted questions, but he stayed silent, his jaw clenched in fury. The official charges: corruption, abuse of power, and multiple cases of sexual misconduct. The government had finally decided to act, and his long history of affairs, over 200 women, was now public knowledge. I couldn't believe it. Baltasar Nganga, the untouchable, the powerful, the man who had threatened my life, was finished. Before I could process everything, my phone rang again. It was her. "Did you see it?" she asked, her voice calm, but with a hint of satisfaction. "I did," I said. "How the hell did this happen?" She exhaled slowly. It wasn't just the video. That was only part of it. After he saw it, he went into a rage, started making desperate moves, trying to silence people. That's when the government took notice. I sat back, stunned. So, it worked. Better than I expected, she admitted. Baltasar had too many enemies, too many secrets. It was only a matter of time. I just gave them the final push. I shook my head, trying to process it all. "So, what now?" She hesitated. "Now, you're safe. You don't have to run anymore." For the first time in weeks, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Baltasar was gone. His power was gone. And I was free. Over the next few weeks, more details emerged. Baltasar wasn't just cheating, he had used his influence to silence women, bribe officials, and protect himself from scandals. But once the government turned against him, all his allies abandoned him. Mrs. Baltasar, on the other hand, became something of a legend. The woman who had brought down a monster. The press followed her every move, speculating what she would do next. Then, one day, she called me again. "I'm leaving the country," she said. "Starting fresh somewhere new. No more looking over my shoulder." I smiled. "You deserve it." She chuckled. "And you? What will you do now?" I thought about it for a moment. Live. Finally. And just like that, the chaos was over. Baltasar Nganga had fallen. And we had won. With Baltasar Nganga behind bars, my life finally felt like it was mine again. No more running. No more paranoia. But even as I tried to return to normal, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. Mrs. Baltasar had disappeared from the public eye after her husband's arrest. The media frenzy died down, and soon the world moved on to the next scandal. But I couldn't forget. Then, one evening, while sitting at a cafe in Madrid, I received an email. No subject, no sender name, just a single line. "Meet me in Lisbon. One last time." I knew exactly who it was. 2 days later, I arrived in Portugal, my heart racing with anticipation. She had chosen a quiet seaside town, far from prying eyes. When I walked into the small restaurant, she was already there, sitting by the window, sipping white wine. Mrs. Baltasar looked different. More relaxed. Lighter. Free. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said with a smirk. Neither was I admitted, taking the seat across from her. We talked for hours. About the past. About the future. About how she had played the game and won. "I thought revenge would make me feel better," she confessed. But in the end, it just made me realize how much time I wasted on him. I nodded. "And now?" She smiled, raising her glass. "Now, I start over." As we left the restaurant, walking along the quiet streets of Lisbon, she stopped suddenly. "Daniel, there's something I never told you." I frowned. "What is it?" She hesitated, then looked me in the eye. "The video. I never sent it to Baltasar." My breath caught. "What?" I made him believe I did. But the real evidence that got him arrested, that came from somewhere else. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Then why did you record it? She smirked. Insurance. Just in case. I exhaled, shaking my head. So, all of this, it was never about revenge. She chuckled. Oh, it was. But I also wanted to make sure I had a future after he was gone. For a moment, I didn't know whether to be impressed or terrified. Mrs. Baltasar had played everyone, including me. But strangely, I didn't feel betrayed. If anything, I felt relieved. Because in the end, she had done what no one else could. She had outsmarted Baltasar in Ganga. And as we stood there, watching the sun set over Lisbon, I realized something else. I was finally beginning to feel free. The weight of the past had started to fade, and I was building a new life. Then, one morning, everything changed. It started with a news alert on my phone. Baltasar in Ganga released from prison after serving reduced sentence. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. This couldn't be real. I reread the headline, hoping I had misunderstood, but the words remained the same. The man I thought was gone forever, the man who had threatened my life, was free. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen. My mind raced. How? Why? What now? Then, another message appeared on my phone. No number. No name. Just one chilling sentence. Did you really think this was over? Baltasar was back. And I knew deep in my bones that he hadn't forgotten. At first, I felt nothing but fear. The old paranoia returned, checking over my shoulder, avoiding public places, feeling like I was being watched. I had escaped once, but could I do it again? Then came the anger. After everything he had done, after all the lives he had ruined, how was he free? It wasn't fair. He should have rotted in prison. But finally, something unexpected happened. Acceptance. I took a deep breath and stared at my reflection in the mirror. Baltasar in Ganga was a powerful man. But he wasn't invincible. I had spent too much time running, hiding, letting him control my life. No more. If he wanted a fight, I would be ready. This time, I wasn't going to run. This time, I would finish it. Months passed after Baltasar's release, and while I had resolved to not let him control my life anymore, the reality of their return hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just the fact that he was free, it was the sense of power he still had over everything. I heard through various sources that Baltasar and his wife, Mrs. Baltasar, had relocated to France. The move was strategic, a fresh start in a country far from the scandals and chaos of their past. They had everything they needed, money, connections, and now a new life to build. But despite their attempt at rebuilding, there was something different in the air. Tension. I, on the other hand, had tried to move forward. I was living in a modest apartment in Barcelona, working freelance as a writer and generally keeping to myself. The shadows of my past were always lacking, but I had learned to manage. I kept my circle small, trusted fewer people, and made sure my name wasn't connected to anything remotely related to Baltasar. I kept my head down, but I couldn't stop wondering what life was like for them in France. Were they happy? Had Mrs. Baltasar finally found peace? Or was she, like me, just waiting for the other shoe to drop? One evening, as I sat in my apartment working, my phone rang. The number was unrecognized. I answered hesitantly. Daniel. The voice was unmistakable. Mrs. Baltasar. She let out a soft laugh. I'm surprised you picked up. I thought you might be avoiding me. My heart skipped. I hadn't heard from her in months. What do you want? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause before she responded. I want to tell you about something. Something I couldn't before. I listened intently, and my curiosity piqued. Baltasar. She began, her voice low, almost regretful. He's not the man he once was. After everything, after the arrest, the media storm, and everything we've been through, he's changed. Not for the better. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. What do you mean? Changed how? She sighed. He's obsessed with revenge. He can't accept that I won. That we won. It's eating him alive. And I'm scared, Daniel. Fear prickled my skin. Scared of what? He's planning something. He wants to come after you, after us, again. I froze. It wasn't just an idle threat, there was genuine fear in her voice. Where are you now? I asked. Are you okay? We're in France. But Daniel, I need you to listen, this isn't over. We need to make a move before he does. I couldn't process everything at once. What do you want from me? She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone was clear and resolute. I need you to help me stop him. For good. That phone call changed everything. I had thought I was free. I had thought that I could put Baltasar behind me, live a quiet life. But now, I knew that if I didn't act, the past would come back to haunt me. But the truth was, I couldn't let him win. Not again. I knew the risks, but I wasn't going to wait for him to find me again. If Mrs. Baltasar had managed to break free from his control, maybe there was a chance to finally end this. To make sure that he would never have the power to hurt anyone again. I packed my things, ready to take the fight to France, where they were now hiding. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about survival. And this time, I wasn't alone. As soon as I landed in Paris, I felt a mixture of relief and confusion. The weight of my past, of Baltasar, and everything he had done, was still pressing on me, but I hoped that somehow this trip would offer closure. I had planned on confronting him, taking matters into my own hands, but fate had other plans. When I reached Mrs. Baltasar's apartment, I was surprised to find her waiting for me, a calmness in her demeanor that seemed almost too peaceful. The last time I had seen her, she was determined, furious, and on a mission to make sure her husband's reign ended. But now, she greeted me with a warm smile. "You're here," she said, her voice softer than I had expected. I made it, I replied, still on edge. "What's going on? Why didn't you tell me about Baltasar's plans?" She motioned for me to sit, her expression serious but not anxious. "You've been through a lot, Daniel. I'm sure you're expecting the worst. But I need you to understand something, my husband, he's done." I stared at her, trying to comprehend her words. "What do you mean he's done?" Mrs. Baltasar sighed and sat down across from me, her hands clasped tightly. After everything that happened, after the arrest, the media circus, and the pressure from his past catching up to him, Baltasar has changed. I know it sounds hard to believe, but he no longer wants revenge. He doesn't want to hurt you or anyone anymore. I couldn't process what she was saying. Are you serious? After everything he did? How can you just? She raised a hand, silencing me. I know it's hard to believe. But after the prison experience, after seeing everything crumble around him, he realized something. His empire, his power, they mean nothing now. He's a broken man, and he wants peace. He told me he doesn't want to fight anymore. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my own fate. I didn't know where I would go next, maybe back to Barcelona, maybe somewhere new entirely, but one thing was certain, I wouldn't be looking over my shoulder anymore. Baltasar in Ganga was no longer part of my story. And for the first time, I was truly free.